2 developer interviews, a collector, and a boy who turns into animals.
What more could you possibly ask for in 2019? On the Shelf is back, baby!
We are finally back from winter break. Sorry about the delay in getting back up to speed on the podcast, but we were hungover from all the holiday eggnog.
We hope you've enjoyed the couple of videos we released in the interim, and we're ready to get right back to business.
On the what?
In the interim?
In interim?
Interim?
Yeah, you have a funny way of pronouncing that.
Oh, the correct way, yeah. I know. It sounds weird to people who don't understand.
No. The sky is blue, not purple.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, it's purple sometimes.
So there's been a couple of adjustments to the format that we're doing, including the Bitcast. We did that with the last podcast, broke it out into a bunch of videos. I think it was pretty successful. We got a lot of different views across the various videos. What do you think?
Aside from blowing up my phone with announcements of videos being uploaded, I would say it was a good thing.
I like blowing up people's phones with announcements of our own videos.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I get an announcement, I look down, I'm like, hey, I released a video today, I guess.
Expect more of that.
I am well prepared for it.
And the next thing we're going to change here, it's not really change. In fact, we sort of started with the previous, one of the previous episodes, is we're going to do more interviews. We have a lot on our slate. Going to try our best to get 2 interviews per month with industry folks.
That's going to be interesting, depending on the length of our podcast. If we get 2 interviews, our podcast is going to get longer and longer. So enjoy the ride, people.
I'm going for 6-hour long podcasts.
I'm down with that. I mean, people like to travel long distances, right?
Like 6 hours in a row.
Well, yeah, three hours one way, 3 hours back. It works out.
Sure.
Well, people will fit us in their lives
somehow. Brand new segment, which I'm looking forward to. We're gonna try to mix this up a little bit. This month in gaming history. In this particular month's one, we're going to cover kind of a special one connected to Nintendo itself. I don't want to give it away, but what do you think about
this month in gaming history? I like it. I like it gives us something to talk about that'll break up what a lot of people. It's something that's guaranteed to be new from show to show. So, and it's guaranteed to be there because some months there's not a whole lot of news.
It's history, so it's also guaranteed to be old from show to show.
Yeah, so we can teach people stuff, get them in that learning. Get that learning on.
Yes. And then another one that we're going to do. Now, we've gone about this a couple of different ways in previous episodes in kind of taking different angles, but adding a collector profile to each podcast where we're going to bring a collector onto the show and talk to them about them and their collection. This month, we're going to talk to Welch's. Welch is one of the gentlemen that's on our Discord. He is also a moderator. He's got a pretty awesome collection going on. I'm looking forward to that.
Yeah. I'm looking forward to hear his excuse for his transition from 100% sealed to I'm going to open them to play them because I can't afford to do sealed like this because it's killing me. I can't wait to hear that because
you just took away all the entire collector's profile right there. That's it. We don't even have to talk to him.
Oh, well, I mean, sorry, Welch. We'll catch you next time. But no, I'm looking forward to hearing that because I hear so many people change their collection standards, and he started out like right out of the gate was just killing it, and then as we all do, he sat back and reevaluated what his wants were and made adjustments, and I'm kind of waiting to hear the thought behind that because there's a lot of people wrestle with that when they're collecting. There's plenty of people in the Discord that talk about how things are getting hard to do this way or that way, or they're just going to change over to doing this. And so I'm always interested to hear when people make that transition, what thought went behind it, because he's not slowing down. He's just changing his collection type, which is great.
I think that it's really become difficult over time. The first year was nowhere near as prolific as the second year. And so it's changed the perspective for a number of collectors who were on board a lot more in the beginning.
Yeah, once people saw how well the Switch was going to be doing, the developers and publishers just started throwing stuff at it like crazy. And then the indies that were developing stuff for mobile saw how easy it was to port things over and be successful. So they started doing that. And it just, I don't know, there's quite a few like low-lying quality games, and then there are quite a few high-profile terrible games, and then of course you have your AAAs above that. So it's getting really flooded. I think that this coming year, being the third year, once the third year starts off in April, I think the third year is probably going to be a little bit more of the same of the second year, but I think after that we're going to start seeing tapering off. They're wanting to extend the Switch's life to like 7 years or so, which is more than most consoles, but the volume of games we see is going to slowly start pulling back, and I think the second and third year is going to be the peak in terms of quantity. Quality is never going to go away, I don't think, but quantity is definitely going to start gearing down towards the end of the third year, in my opinion.
That's an interesting prediction. I kind of think that years 2 through 4 will probably be close, but a little up and down. It'll probably be within a range of each year will be close to those other years as far as volume, in my opinion. I don't think we're going to really see a downturn until year 5. That'll be where everything starts to go downwards, and probably rather sharply at that point.
Yeah, I'll pull a comic book collector's term for this. The mid 90s, when everybody was publishing everything in the comic zone, the term for that was called the bulge, and that's probably what we're looking at now. You're going to have quite a few good games, and then there's going to be so much to complain about. But yeah, I think that's what we're looking at right now. And you may be right. It may extend that far, but I'm gonna stick with my towards the end of year 3. We're gonna start seeing it. It's not gonna be all at once. It's not gonna be a sudden drop off, in my opinion, going into year 4. But that's what I'm expecting, is a slowdown of so much.
It certainly will be interesting no matter what happens. I mean, you got to figure that a really good development cycle will be a couple of years for a game. Something that's like a really large game anyways. You know, smaller games can be developed much faster, but things that are of a larger nature are going to take 2 years from conception to actual realization and publishing, that type of thing. And so a lot of people that went through that first year, you know, and they saw how the Switch did in the first year, then they're like, okay, let's do our next game. Let's bring that next game on there. Yeah. And so we're going to see some of that realize itself this year. And then you'll have another cycle after that.
Yeah.
So that's why I kind of go out that far. I think we'll see a lot of that happen, you know, through the next couple of years, the next few years. It'll be interesting though. I think we're in for a good ride. I really don't know what to make of it. I'm kind of just hanging on and waiting to see what happens.
Yeah. I'm going to interject a little bit of news that's not in our news list here, because it kind of relates to what you just said about the development cycle, and that was that Metroid Prime 4 has announced that they are scrapping what they have and handing the reins back over to Retro Studios, who did 1 through 3. And
it's not a bad
it's
thing,
not.
I think.
It's not a bad
other
thing.
than the delay.
It's not a bad thing. Exactly. That's the delay I'm talking about, because you were talking about the development cycle, and now this massive title is having to restart over at the beginning of the third year almost. So that's we're probably looking.
I'm not worried about that though.
Yeah.
I honestly am not, because that giving that title back to them, is probably the best possible scenario, aside from the fact that it's just going to take longer because they're going to be behind, right? Mm-hmm. Even if they have some ideas and stuff to use, they are going to have to kind of go back to the drawing board a little bit here and start that whole machine up again, right? But I'm glad that it's going back that direction.
Yeah, it just means that we're instead of a year 3 Metroid, we're looking at a late year 4, early year 5, maybe if we're lucky. But Retro did good with the first 3, so it's not like we're not getting an other M, so that's at least something to be happy about. But
I almost wonder if this is going to force Nintendo to release the trilogy like as a compilation prior to, just to satiate people.
All the better. Release the trilogy,
right.
And that, because that would make everybody happy. And this is actually a really good thing for Nintendo to be doing. You know, people are going to give them a lot of crap, but look what would happen if they pushed it out the door. Like, look at Fallout 76, how that game wasn't ready and they just shoved it out the door.
It's the best Fallout ever.
Okay, you can. I'm sorry. Anybody listening to this, I'm taking applications to have a new co-host.
Yeah, no, that's
I mean, that's,
obviously that was in jest.
So Metroid Prime being just shoved out, like, that would have been disastrous if it wasn't ready. If it wasn't good, it would have been disastrous, because Metroid is a heavily side. So Nintendo is doing the opposite of what most companies seem to do, and that is, you know, if you don't, most companies are like, if you know, you don't have to buy our games. Like, we're going to release it. If you don't think it's going to be good, just, you know, don't buy it. But Nintendo's saying, we're not going to release this because we don't think it's going to be good. So right. that's right. Huge. It's a huge thing for Nintendo to step up and do. Nintendo, you know, good guy Nintendo right there.
Yeah, hopefully they don't get too much crap from people on this. I know there's some people that are upset, and they're going to be upset. I mean, come on, everybody's been dying to play a new Metroid regardless. The little bit and of material we've gotten on the remaster that was released for the 3DS was great, but not new, not really new. You know, let's see something new eventually here, and that's what people are upset about. They want something new. I get it, but maybe this isn't so bad. Maybe people should kind of realize that, and let's see what happens. Another change is that recently on the Hitting Shelves videos, we have added all the small print publishing games in that we can. That has been somewhat challenging just due to the nature of the small window sometimes between announcement and release. So I've had to go back and craft brand new video for that when we weren't expecting to. We've also had late stage changes. Sometimes the day of recording.
Yeah, there's no sweet spot
for that.
There's no sweet spot for that at all.
No, not at all. It proves rather challenging, but at the same time, I think we're committed to trying to put all of that together into video for everybody, so that they don't miss anything. In fact, on the one that we just did on the 26th, we were able to get that out. And actually had people come back and say, hey, thanks. I had not heard or forgot about the timing of that. And because they saw the video, they were able to get in on the Velocity 2X sale when that went up from Strictly Limited, which is great, giving people an opportunity to catch something they might have missed otherwise.
Yeah, that, man, I had decided that I wasn't going to get into another importing the limited print game collection. Like, I wasn't going to do Strictly, but Velocity 2X, like, I already ordered Fox and Forests because that was the inaugural, so I was like, I'm going to get this just because. But Velocity 2X, man, like, that's, I've seen so much about it, and I really, really want to play that game. It looks so good. I just don't, I'm trying to talk myself out of buying it, but I'm thinking I'm probably going to cave.
It looks really neat. I love the idea of combining the shmup and the action platformer. You're playing two different games in one game, which is fantastic. I mean, we saw how that worked out with Yoku's Island Express, playing pinball in Metroidvania.
It's very Blaster Master kind of. It is. I love it.
It's great. It looks like it's going to work really well. Everything I've seen looks like it's going to be a fun game.
Yeah, I've heard a lot of people say good things about it.
You've subtly reminded me that that I skipped something. We are also working on the way to focus on Game of the Month, which if you are not already familiar, and most of you probably are, on the subreddit for NS collectors, Adorabear has started posting a poll every month that allows people to nominate and then subsequently vote on a choice for a Game of the Month for everybody on the subreddit to play. Now, this has been going on for a few months, and it seemed like a really good thing for us to kind of latch onto as well, tie us back into the subreddit that we usually work with. And this past month was Monster Boy and the Cursed Kingdom, which I had a chance to play, and we'll talk about that in a little bit.
Yeah, that's another one of those games everybody's been just raving about. So can't wait to hear what you have to say about it. I know that you were sending me screenshots trying to convince me that I needed to play it, but I was in the middle of other games. So
speaking of other games, you released a video for Bendy and the Ink Machine, and I don't want to take anything from that video, but at least kind of let everybody know that if you haven't checked out that little video that Cyrix made, go do that.
Yeah, I
what inspired you to do that?
Well, to be fair, let's see, my wife was out of town on business, so it was just me and my son at the house. And
is that what we're calling it?
Yeah. And then after he would go to bed, I had a little bit of time to kill, because I wait for him to fall asleep before I go to bed. So he doesn't fall asleep very quickly, especially when he's got toys in his room. So I had some time to kill, basically, and I threw Bendy in just kind of on a whim. It's not a super long game, so I figured I could play through it in a couple nights, which is what I did. And then I was like, you know what, this is a really good game. I kind of feel like I want to share some insight on it. And so I ninja'd a video together and then ninja'd it up onto the YouTube channel, because I didn't even tell you I was doing it until it was done. And I was like, hey, there's a video for you to look at. But it was a really enjoyable game. Like I hope people go and check out the video of it. I've had several people ask me about the game, and I have responded to many people who have mentioned the game on the subreddit, but I have not directly linked the video to them out of self-advertisement. I'm trying not to do that, but in the subreddit there have been several people asking about it, and then of course the Discord, everybody was telling me they watched the video, and a few people said that they weren't going to look at the game, but then when they heard me say it's not for everybody, they figured they'd give the video a shot, and then they ended up trying to play the game anyway. So it's a great game. Hope everybody enjoys and checks out that video. Leave me some comments about how terrible of a video it is, because that was 100% me. So don't worry about offending Soul at all.
I plan on going and leaving some comments later
on a sock account, so I don't know it's you, or are you just going to do it right to my face? That's
No, I'm just going to do it right to your face. I would never behind a different account. I would definitely tell you directly how much I hate it.
All right. Well, that's fine.
All right, so let's talk about Monster Boy and the Cursed Kingdom. As I mentioned earlier, for a few months now over on the NS Collector subreddit, Adorabear has been running a Game of the Month thread, and nominations run for about a week in a pinned post. At the end of the week, the top nominations are put into a poll that runs for about another week, and the winner is the Game of the Month. We are going to start playing along and sharing our thoughts on each month's winner. During the month of January, the game to play was Monster Boy and the Cursed Kingdom. I know that Cyrix didn't get a chance to play this month's Game of the Month.
No, and I would like to add within reason, because Troll and I is coming very close to winning right now.
Yeah, I'm going to go create some sock accounts for that one, that's for sure. Anyway, so I'll be rolling fairly solo with my review of this particular game, but feel free to throw in whenever you want.
All right.
Now, before I get to my personal thoughts, here's a little background. Monster Boy and the Cursed Kingdom is developed by Game Atelier and is published by FDG Entertainment. It was actually planned out as a Kickstarter, but FDG stepped in to partner with the developer, allowing them to move ahead with the project without having to worry about funding. The game itself is actually a sequel to the Wonder Boy series. The game was even developed in collaboration with, and I'm probably going to butcher this one, Ryuichi Nishizawa. I'm hoping I get even close to that one. But he had developed the original Wonder Boy, released to arcades back in 1986. So this series is pretty old. The original game obviously saw several ports, including its most famous on the Sega Master System, which had been released in 1987. And as a side note, the numbering, and I guess I never even realized how bad this is, but the numbering for the Wonder Boy / Monster World series is a giant jumbly mess. The best way for me to illustrate that is one of the games and how it's titled. So what we know of in the West as Wonder Boy and Monster World, in Japan, the game's name is Wonder Boy 5 Monster World 3. So if that's not confusing, I don't know what is.
Interesting. I know that Dragon's Trap is Wonder Boy 3.
Yes. So nomenclature aside, I was very excited about playing this game. The opening cinematics are done up in cell animated style and are of high quality. The colorful world is wonderful to look at while you play. Each zone, from the initial village all the way through the Dark Realm, manages to hold a unique look and feel, while still remaining similar enough not to feel completely out of place as you progress. The character sprites, from Jin, the main characters, to all of the enemies and NPCs are drawn quite well. The art style gets high marks from me. Now, have you had a chance to actually see footage or watch trailers for this?
So, I was watching a streamer that I know, not personally, but I've spoken to her in the past. But I watched her play Monster Boy. She actually used to play Wonder Boy, like competitively, basically in the speedrunning. She had several of the world records. She's played several games, but she was playing Monster Boy recently, and I watched about an hour or so of that. And
okay, yeah. So you've had a chance to see the visuals and kind of get a feel for the game and be at least somewhat familiar.
Yes, yeah, yep. It looks great. I do intend on playing it fairly soon. I'm in the middle of something else that I will not talk about at the moment with the Switch and some games, but as soon as I get done with that, I will definitely turn my attention towards Monster Boy for sure.
So on to my personal feelings about the game. So Monster Boy and the Cursed Kingdom, to me, is a great mix of action, platforming, puzzle solving, and Metroidvania. And I think that you'll definitely find yourself backtracking through areas that you've already visited to uncover more secrets and hunt for the treasures that you've missed. There are plenty of chests hidden throughout the game to keep you occupied. One of the best aspects of the game is absolutely central to the story. As you work your way through each zone and defeat each boss, you acquire the mystical animal orbs that one of the main antagonists, Mysticat, seeks for himself. After acquiring a new orb, you are now able to transform into a new animal form, granting you a new set of abilities that allow Jin to access areas he was unable to reach previously. So from pig to snake to dragon, each ability has something to bring as you uncover more of the secrets and collect more treasure. It is by far one of my favorite aspects of the game, especially considering that through a majority of the game, you are not hindered in what form you are allowed to take. If you've unlocked it, it's yours to use. Now, you and I have both played plenty of games throughout our life, and you know how that can be at times where when you progress through something and they grant you something, in some cases, in many games, you have a large set of limitations around that. And this game really doesn't do that very much. It does do it. There are times. But in general, you're free to flip around between the various forms, which is really nice.
I know that in the speed run, the frog seemed to be what was used most of the time.
The frog has a lot of advantages and can definitely move really fast, especially with water.
Yeah, and well, I take that back. Until they got the lion. Once they got the lion, that's what because the lion run over water.
Yeah, the lion has some really cool abilities, including that dash, which you can run across water. Now, I do have two areas specific within the game where I want to bring a little bit of criticism, but I would say right now that neither of these is enough to make me fail to recommend the game. The first is the game's soundtrack. Now, while I will say that the included tracks are musically very nice and each one fits the zone they're in, there is not nearly enough variety in the music for when you're revisiting areas later in the game. I wish that each zone had more than one track, and then it would have been a much better experience in that department. So, high marks for the music itself, but it's just far too repetitive over the length of the gameplay. The second area is that there are a few chests and one really big secret in the game that would honestly and very truly be nearly impossible for anyone at all to find without some sort of help from either online or some other resource. And it would have really been nice if there would have been at least some minor clues for those particular things. And that biggest secret, that one area, is something that any fans of the classic Wonder Boy or Monster World would really love, and it's a bit of a shame that it's not just a little bit more apparent what to do to get to that. And I could easily see a lot of people giving up and not bothering, or not even knowing that it ever exists, which is sad. But I will tell you right now, even with those two criticisms, Monster Boy and the Cursed Kingdom is an extremely solid game, and I would recommend it for most people. So there you go. There you have it.
Well, I'm glad that you enjoyed the game of the month. So, yeah. No, I'm glad you enjoyed the game of the month. I do intend on checking it out. Hopefully, the next game of the month winner is not something terrible that I'm not going to bring up again.
Like Troll
I
and
was not going to say the
I decided to say that. I want to bring awareness that people need to vote against that, but it's probably too late by the time this comes out. We'll find out.
Yeah, and there's a few good ones on there too. I mean, I've already played through Poi, but that would be a really good one for people who haven't.
Which is why that's such a shame. If something like Troll and I wins, you are taking a legitimate month away from games that deserve the play.
Yeah.
That's why I believe that's so bad. It's not, I get the meme, everybody gets the meme, but when it comes down to it, for, a game of the month thing, we want participation. We want people to actually play, and I think that most people are not interested in actually playing Troll.
You also run risk of losing out some of the other games, because Poi is in there this month, but next month, there may be other games that come out that people aren't going to vote for Poi. Like if this was towards March, we have Yoshi's next game coming out, the Yoshi games coming out. So we're going to have people.
Yoshi's Crafted World.
If this is closer towards the end of March, we have Yoshi's Crafted World coming out. So chances are that's probably going to be, at least sometime in the first couple months, it's going to be on the list. And that means that a game like Poi is probably not going to get the votes it needs to be on the list. So if Troll and I wins, you could be robbing people of some enjoyment just for the memes.
One of the things that we get to do this month, as I mentioned previously, is have a couple of interviews. So let's slide right on into that first one.
All right, we'd like to welcome to the show Dennis Varvaro from Aloft Studios. Can you tell our listeners who you are and what you're here to represent?
Hey guys, this is Dennis Varvaro. As mentioned, I'm from a newly formed startup, Aloft Studio LLC. We were just incorporated somewhere around March 2018, although we've been in informal existence since about 2013, 2014. We've worked on a series of prototypes between that time, and we're actually getting ready to release our first commercial products this year and next year, hopefully. And we're really looking forward to that.
Well, thank you for coming on. And before we dive pretty deeply into Hazelnut Bastille, which, believe me, we're going to do that, I'd like to ask you a little bit about your early gaming memories. Like, when you look back now, what are those first games that inspired you?
Well, those are sort of two different questions. I actually have two very clear early gaming memories, and they couldn't be two more perfect games. my very first gaming memory, I'm probably 3 or 4 years old, and I'm gathered with the family over in Long Island, the outer Islip area. We're over at grandparents' house. My grandfather's making pizza at the time. He's over in the other room, and we're all gathered around the television playing the first Super Mario Brothers. Like, it was actually the experience that Miyamoto pictured. Like, they called it the Famicom, while we were actually having a family experience. There were 4 or 5 of us all gathered around the television together, guiding Mario through the first few levels and failing repeatedly.
It's a classic.
Yeah, it couldn't be more like Norman Rockwell, picture perfect even. And then, could you guess what my second clear gaming memory might be?
I'm going to guess it has something to do with Zelda.
Yes, it does indeed. And it is the original Legend of Zelda. And we're staying with some friends at the time. I'm probably about 5 or 6 years old. Our house had just burned down while we were away. It was some sort of faulty wiring in the stove. And the home wasn't very old at all. I mean, it was just constructed 2 years ago. So it was probably some sort of installation error. But we're all there gathered at my mother's friend's house. And of all things, she just happens to have another Nintendo lying around. And she's giving The Legend of Zelda a go. And we were just, me in particular, I was absolutely mystified. It was an entirely different game to any I had experienced heretofore on the NES. I hadn't seen anything like an RPG of any kind, and I was just entranced for the next hour and a half. I really didn't play very much. I mostly just watched my father play, but I mean, from then on, I was pretty much hooked, and I've been under the spell ever since.
Is there any game from the past that you go back to constantly, like maybe one that you have to play through a few times a year just because?
It's probably not anything like that I can recall. I really don't play so many games. I mean, at this point in my life, which is kind of paradoxical. I mean, that as a game developer, you sort of end up just putting all of your heart into your craft, and it demands so much of your time. It's almost like a monastic pursuit, if that makes sense.
It really does. But you've got an artist and architecture background, right?
Mm-hmm.
And what made you choose that path in life?
To me, it was something that I stumbled upon maybe 16, 17 years old. I had just completed a course in art history in high school, and it wasn't really something that I had a lot of involvement in up to that time, but just the idea of using mathematics and geometry to convey sacred human emotional ideas, the fact that you could create art with just mathematics was extremely captivating to me. And so at that point, I sort of viewed architecture as this lens through which I could practice the science and mathematics and the art and engineering world all at the same time. And that was something that was very important to me, finding a career that I could balance all of my interests with at the same time and never really grow bored with.
Can you tell us how Aloft Studio was formed, like how you met your partners?
Yeah, absolutely. So let's see. It was probably about 3 or 4 years into my architecture career, and the current firm that I was at more or less had to pack up and leave town. I mean, there was kind of some sort of impropriety going on, but I don't really want to get too far into that. But I mean, the short of it is that firm had to leave the state. And from there, I actually went with one of the past principals who worked there. And we went and we lived in Belgium for a time. I think it was like 3 or 4 months, something like that, over with a famous landscape architecture firm that he had some ties and contact with from earlier in his life. And then from there, after I returned to the States, I mean, I was kind of a free agent. I spent maybe 2 months looking for another firm to jump into. There wasn't really anything biting in the current city I was living in. Charlottesville, which was the famous city in the news just recently. And from there, I started dividing my time between looking for more work and pursuing an amateur game project with friends that I had met online years past. And the more I started working on those projects and prototypes, I mean, the deeper down the rabbit hole I went, to the extent where I was able to start earning money on the level that I was in the architecture world. And I was kind of teetering on the border between two worlds at that point. And I slowly sort of started teetering more toward this direction. I mean, we worked on a series of prototypes, as I mentioned. A person new to development has a lot of barriers against them, especially if they don't have a career directly in the major studios. Now, the person I was working with at the time did. He had a background in Blizzard and Activision, so he was probably the more anchored of the two of us. I had a lot to learn. I mean, I had a lot of background in the same sort of programs and workflow from the architecture world, because a lot of it was common between the two industries. But I had to learn things about how to set realistic expectations in a project, how to have the discipline to see something through, what you can accomplish as a small group of people and what you can't. I mean, what's actually within your financial wherewithal to accomplish. I mean, probably a good 3 or 4 years of working at that before I was in a place where I felt confident that we could actually put something out that was commercial. And we started on a project called Sticks and Starships, which was a project set in a voxel world about the idea of engineering a whole civilization from just the bare bones. The game would be about resource acquisition, material processing, planning out a very complex infrastructure that had sourcing and many levels of manufacturing involved in its whole process. And you would go from the very primitive level all the way up to industrial society and then maybe further on. And it was something that we made a lot of progress with, maybe a year and a half worth. But then the gentleman I was working with at the time sort of had to step away from the project. He had some very pressing family issues. And I worked on a series of solo prototypes from that point forth, maybe 3 or 4 more, while I was waiting for him to come back to that project. And one of those projects actually ended up being viable, and it's the project that you now know as Hazelnut Bastille. And that's the project that we've really been focusing on ever since. In fact, the gentleman I was talking about earlier, working on Sticks and Starships, we're actually reviving that project, and it's been going on in the background as Hazelnut Bastille has been developing. But that's something that we're not really pushing to the forefront. I'm kind of loath to show the public something that might be delayed further. So we really don't show anything anymore that's not on the fast track to being done very quickly. So we really aren't showing very much other than Hazelnut Bastille and Dawnthorn, which is its sister project at this time.
You answered a couple of questions that are coming up already. So.
Oh man, okay.
Where did you end up setting up shop? Like, where's the studio? Is it in Aloft?
Well, that's a little deceiving. It's not a studio in the sense that it's a building that we all visit. I mean, we're all working from home, from our home offices. The business is based out of my home office, which is in Virginia Beach, Norfolk area. And the other gentleman that I'm working on this project with, Mark Harbog, he's over in Kansas City right now.
I was gonna ask about what happened to Sticks and Starships, but because you gave us so much on that, all I would ask about it now is, do you think that it will see a significant visual update?
I actually think that it will. I mean, my sensibilities have kind of grown since we started the project, and the visuals to the characters for that project sort of have like this balloon-like sort of bubbly appearance. I'm thinking that I will probably stylize those characters a bit more, maybe to more invoke the sense that they're living in the voxel environment and they have a more clear relationship with the world that they live in. I think that was the biggest problem that I saw with the art style.
It was an interesting thing to do some research and kind of dig deeper on that and find what I could on that game. I'll say that much.
There wasn't a whole lot published about it. In
No.
fact, there was a rock, paper, shotgun article on it. And that was just as we were considering running a Kickstarter on that project. But then, I mean, that was pretty close to when the other principal in the project had to move on.
Yeah, I did run into that and found some of that very interesting. I'm kind of hoping that you do revive that project in a sense that you're learning what you're doing from what you're doing now and maybe bringing some more of that into it. But we've kind of avoided this long enough. Let's talk about Hazelnut Bastille a little bit more. So can you tell us how that all began? Like, what really was the spark for that?
So Hazelnut Bastille, I was working on another prototype again at this time, and this is something that sounds funny, but it's something that game developers are doing all the time. They're playing with these little ideas, these seeds, seeing if they can grow something out of it. Oftentimes, these prototypes have some implicit flaw to them. And the project that I was working on at the time is an idea centered around brutalist architecture. The code name for that project was Megastructure. And in fact, that's a project that might get finished in the future. But I mean, who knows? But anyway, at that point, a friend of mine online had mentioned that he wanted to do a summer project before he entered the job world. And I actually suggested something that I had in mind from years ago. I mean, the first Legend of Zelda game is one of the most economical games ever created for the amount of impact it has. I mean, if you look at the tile set, the sprite sheets from that game, all of the animations usually have 2 frames. The entire tile set fits into a 256 times 256 area. I mean, the principles behind the design are so simplistic, but they go so far. So to me, it seems like the lowest of all low-hanging fruits in indie development, in the sense that when you're just starting out, I don't think you should take on a very large project. My opinion of it is that you should probably look for something that you can finish in just 2 months, 5 months, something like that. And I suggested that we take on a project like that for the summer projects. I would take a break from Megastructure, and we would take on a project similar to the first Legend of Zelda. And we did I mean, I'll take responsibility for this. We did something that a lot of studios do in the early days of a project, and we let scope creep get the best of us. And if you're not familiar with that concept, it's something you have in development where you start out with a simple seed of an idea, and it feels like you're in a good place. So you just start adding more interesting features to it. It's an accretional thing. You just started adding more layers. I mean, maybe there's a new mode, and it got to the point where that prototype got out of hand. And it happened very organically and gradually, but at the very least, it got out of hand in a way that we were still able to at least grab hold of. And that's kind of how Hazelnut Bastille developed. It's a 2-month project that became a 3.5-year project. But thankfully, it's still within our grasp to complete.
What made you decide that Kickstarter would give you the platform you needed for funding as opposed to one of the other crowdfunding options like Indiegogo or GoFundMe or something?
Well, there's a lot that's written about that. I think the answers are pretty straightforward and direct. I mean, the biggest thing that Kickstarter has going for it is a sense of urgency. And it's probably a bit of a false concept, because I mean, there isn't actually the urgency. I mean, a project can be restarted any number of times. I mean, a failure does have consequences, But the concepts that you're pushing is that if the thing doesn't get funded in the time period that you set for it, then you're not going to accomplish your goals as stated. And for us, that actually is realistic in some sense, in that we have a vision for what the project could be in its best state. And we definitely wouldn't be able to accomplish that without the degree of funding that we saw. I mean, not to add another layer to this, but we were seeking something, I think, around $65,000 for the most basic version. And we ended up with something like $177,000, which we were not planning on at all. And after Kickstarter took their share of it, I mean, you have about, I think it was about 155,000 left. I can actually pull up the number here. And we lost, I think, maybe 5,000, 4,000, something around there. And that was due to people stepping away, not being able to actually put forth the money when it was actually time to pay. And that's something that's pretty natural when it happens, because a lot of people are under the impression that you pay when you actually make your pledge, and that's not what happens. You actually end up having the money taken out of your account the day the project finishes. And we had a few major pledges cancel. One of them was a $2,500 tier, but we came away with a very good amount of money. Even so, I mean, it was 157,000 here, looking at the spreadsheet. And I mean, there's so much that this pays for. It pays for our business permits. It pays for our legal fees. It pays for the LLC renewal fees. I mean, we have asset licenses. We have Unity's 2 seats of Unity Plus we have to pay for. I mean, we have quality assurance and the ratings bureaus that we have to go through. And that's more money than you would think. That's probably at 5,000, 7,000. We'll have to go through the Nintendo Switch certification process, and that's another 3,500. I mean, there's the Switch development kits. That's an additional 1,000. And then we have some money that's set aside based upon various reward tiers that we have. We have a budget to create the sheet music. We have the budget for the shipping costs for the physical copies that we actually offered. And that's actually a very substantial amount of money, the physical copies. I mean, probably what would surprise most people, if you're not familiar with that, is that you need to buy a very large mandatory minimum for the Nintendo Switch platform. Usually it's 3,000 to 5,000 copies. And those copies aren't cheap. I mean, the kind of card that goes into the Switch, it's probably a few dollars. It's probably $5 or $6 just to manufacture that for the company to break even. And for most of the people who would actually offer those physical copies to be manufactured, they rate them usually between 10 and 15 USD. And multiply that by 5,000 and all the certifications on top of that, and you're looking at $60,000, something like that, just to manufacture for the Switch. And that actually became a very substantial number that was dictating things late in our process that we weren't actually planning on. And that happened because the manufacturing companies were very late in getting back to us. They didn't get back to us until about a month before we actually launched the Kickstarter. I mean, despite us trying numerous times to reach them. And getting that sticker price was a bit of a shocker. You guys probably remember that we had, a petition that we had just to make sure that we had enough demand in order to offer those as a reward. I mean, we were very worried about that price.
Certainly.
And yeah, so getting back to the original question though about why we chose Kickstarter over Indiegogo and the other choices, I mean, there's a sense of urgency. I mean, there's just flat out a much larger market share for Kickstarter. If you look at the amounts of money that you can raise on either platform, usually you see 5 and 6 times the amounts at Kickstarter versus any of the other platforms. And so that was a pretty simple decision point for us.
So I probably going to flip a couple of questions around so we can stay a little bit on this topic, because, you know, your first day of that Kickstarter, you guys came out like a rocket and kind of blew past expectations, right? So what do you think of the pace of the funding as you went throughout the project? And would you say that, I mean, it kind of sounds like in some ways you are, in some ways you aren't, but are you pleased with that final result?
Yeah, I mean, we're absolutely pleased. And I can't picture a world in which you wouldn't be.
Right.
I mean, are you more getting at the why of how that came about, and why we weren't fully, completely surprised it happened? Or
no, just more thinking about the, you know, your thoughts on the pace of that funding. Like I said, I moved a couple of questions around, so this is maybe sounding a little bit out of turn, but it'll make more sense after this answer. I just kind of want to get your thoughts on that pace of the funding throughout at each step of the project.
So basically, if you look at the kick track of our project, and for those who aren't familiar, kick track is just a tracking service that they have for Kickstarter projects. And it's incredibly useful because you can look at the entire past funding histories for very successful projects, less successful ones, and you can kind of get a baseline for what's natural, what you should expect. And of course, you shouldn't bank upon your hypotheses that you extract from that, but you can learn a lot. And generally, a somewhat successful project like ours will often see what you could call like a reverse bell curve, where you have like a very strong start and a very strong finish. And you're kind of in a bit of a desert in the middle part, which is expected, where you're trying to maintain interest throughout the project. And we had a very strong start, and what I would attribute that to, we had been building our mailing list for a huge amount of time. It might have been, I forget at this point, but it might have been 18 months. And that's one of the biggest things that you're told to focus on the marketing for a Kickstarter. You want as many people on your mailing list as possible. And a good rule of thumb to go by is, if your mailing list is engaged, take the number of people who are actually engaging and reading the mail, divide that by half, and you can expect that amount of people to pledge around $20 or so usually. And another rule of thumb is that you want to accomplish about a third of your funding goal within like the first 5 or 6 days of your project. And combine those two together and you'll have an idea of exactly how many people you need on your mailing list in order to accomplish your goals. And so that was the biggest thing that we used as an index for determining when we were actually ready. And when we hit the point at which we were on track to meet our projection, I think it was maybe 2 months before that we set a tentative date, and then a month before we locked it in. And there's a bit to say about the day that we chose to start and end as well. I mean, there's a bit of literature about this, and what they say is the best days to start and end are Tuesdays and Thursdays. And Tuesday, it's pretty easy to understand why. For whatever reason, it's one of the biggest social media days. Usually Tuesday around noon is when you have the biggest chance to make an impact with something that you post on Reddit or Twitter, any of those social media platforms. And so that's when I think that was our start date, a Tuesday at noon. And other considerations that you really have to look at, you don't want to start anywhere during the month of December at this point of the year, because like a switch flicks in people's head where they're into the mode thinking, it's December, I have to spend all the money I plan to spend on Christmas shopping, at least if you're in the Western world with us. You don't want to start your projects near the end of the month or the very beginning of the month, because that's around the time when people have their bills like rent being due, their mortgage, utility bills. So you want to avoid that day. And you want to give a pretty good buffer around any major holidays, which you'll have difficulty competing with Halloween or Thanksgiving or anything like that. And so basically when we made the decision to launch, we only had a few possible viable dates to set for our launch and end date. And we planned to have a campaign of maybe 30, 32 days. But based upon the days I think we were forced into by circumstance, we ended up having a 37-day Kickstarter. And a lot of people, I think, were kind of surprised when they came to the project and that they saw we had 27 days left. They were thinking that it had been going for 3 days rather than 10 days at that point. And so it looked even better than it actually was in their eyes. And you add all of those factors together, the large mailing list, the very large initial boost, getting onto the projects that we love tab and Kickstarter, the impression that we were further along than we should have been because people weren't aware of how many days we actually had in our project. All of it added together to have a very strong pusher momentum from the beginning that we were able to carry pretty far through the end. I was working pretty hard through the project, I would say. I mean, probably 12, 16-hour days every day during the project. I mean, just trying to make the biggest social media presence that we could without being a nuisance. And that's actually more challenging than it sounds because, I mean, a lot of social media platforms have an antagonistic relationship to Kickstarter now. And you can kind of reason why that is. I mean, people being in the same situation that I am, or I was rather, having to really push their project no matter what and really just make it an overall nuisance of themselves. It became very hard to actually talk about a Kickstarter on Reddit. And you have to sort of talk about it sideways now, where you'll just be sort of posting media and you'll just, I mean, if someone asks about the project, you can post your website and your website then will have a link to the Kickstarter. And the mods of some Reddits are even wise to that, and they don't really look too kindly upon that. So there's not a lot you can do. We actually had a number of very great Imgur topics, which is something that I hadn't really used in the past. But we had a few that went all the way up to nearly 1 million views. And you can do much better than that even. I mean, I actually saw a few recently that were up to 12 million views. But 1 million views is nothing to sneeze at. And when we actually did projections of where we expected to be versus where we actually ended up on the days that those great topics hit, it might have added thousands of dollars to our projections.
I think you've covered pretty much what I was going to ask on my other question too, which is really great because you're really touching on a lot of the pieces that I think people would be interested in hearing with regards to the Kickstarter process. I kept thinking about how grueling that whole process must have been for your team, and I know that I saw you
for me in particular,
really late hours.
I mean, I'm pretty much like the sole marketing guy in the project.
Yeah.
I mean, not to take away from Mark, because Mark does incredible work, and he's an amazing partner. I mean, just having someone who puts in steady, responsible hours is more than you can sometimes expect from a small indie partner. And that I really have to hand it to Mark. I mean, for just sticking with it, being stoic, I mean, being very responsible in his thinking at every stage of the project. And he basically just kept things going in the background while I focus on marketing for that 50 days or so. I mean, it really took a toll on me. I'm not gonna lie.
Don't worry, Soul. Someday you'll know what it's like to have a partner like that.
Yeah, well,
But yeah, I mean that was, it wasn't even Hell Week. It wasn't Hell Month. It was Hell Month and 2/3. I mean, I had to spend a good 12, 15 days just decompressing after all of it. I mean, not to go into detail, but I mean, my heart rate was a bit faster than it should have been consistently. I mean, just shock of neurotransmitters. I really had to re-energize after that.
It's understandable.
Mm-hmm.
what were the original platform plans for the game? Was it always intended to be on home consoles, or did you think that it would be like a PC only game, or what was the original thought?
When you actually start an indie project, it sounds kind of strange, but you don't really do anything if you're doing it right, I think, but focus on just the prototype itself. I mean, we had an idea of what consoles it might fit, might not, but we were just focused on getting a living, sustainable idea, something that we could actually carry forward. And that's not always something you can do with any prototype. I mean, most of them just die in the first couple months. But when it actually became viable and it looked like something that we could commercially push, we had just said, we're going to put this thing on Steam. And if it does well there, then we'll take it further. And that was more or less where it stood for the longest time. I mean, we had the intention of possibly moving to the Nintendo Switch platform, and we toyed with that. But we didn't really lock that in until very close to the Kickstarter. I mean, we were sort of putting out feelers for what people wanted to see in the projects, and a Nintendo Switch build was the thing that we heard 70% of the time. And after investigating it and finding out that other than obtaining the dev kits, there really aren't too many major hurdles, we more or less said, okay, this is something that we're going to commit to. And then we sort of publicized that from there. And to go back, I think it was actually a bit earlier than the Kickstarter, now that I remember, because I think it was March of 2018 that we actually made that commitment. And we were thinking that the Kickstarter might have been a bit earlier than it was at that point. I think some of the things that delayed it were just the music for the demo that we needed to complete. And the reason why that was important was because we made a very big deal of having a vertical slice demo available for everyone during the Kickstarter to try before we actually started publicizing it. And the reason I think that was very important, there's a lot of Kickstarters that have been made since about 2013, 2014, the golden age of Kickstarter, where, I mean, people have sort of had dollar signs in their eyes, and they didn't really put in the due diligence to really demonstrate they had the actual resources and the actual discipline to go through with finishing the project. I don't want to name any names, but if you think very hard, you can probably think of a few that are still rankling in recent memory. And so having a demo, something that people could get a complete picture of what we were actually asking them to spend money on, I mean, being able to try before they would buy, it was a very important part of actually proving our commitment to the project. And so we didn't actually start pushing toward the Kickstarter until we were completely finished with that demo.
You know how hard, I mean, you kind of said it yourself, how hard the people in the Switch community were pushing for that stretch goal and that physical to happen. But are you at all surprised about how passionate the Switch fans can be, or did you just expected that?
It was sort of half and half. I had some familiarity with the degree to which Nintendo fans can become very zealous, but actually experiencing the community firsthand and directly, rather than just having people actually demand the Switch, but actually going and meeting the people from the community surrounding the Nintendo platform, there was a lot of positive energy. We really had a great experience meeting all of those people. I mean, the Switch Force community, which I think you gentlemen are affiliated with, right?
Switch Core.
Yeah, the Switch Core. That's right. Yeah, sorry. Switch Force is something else, right?
I guess.
I think they're a news aggregate.
Okay. Yeah. I'm sorry. The Switch Core. We were very surprised the day we'd actually met that group of people, and it was something like 50, 60, 70 people just showed up out of the woodwork. I mean, it was something like from the movie Hook, where Robin Williams goes and meets Rufio and the Lost Boys. It was
Bangarang.
Bangarang.
Well, you know, it's really something to be said about the passion of the folks that really enjoy the platform, but also were looking for games like what you're developing. So, what's your favorite stretch goal from the project, and why?
Probably the one that we didn't meet, but I think we have a strong intention of trying to implement it anyway. The randomizer.
Ooh.
And that's actually something they advise you not to do, to chase after trends. Because at the point something is a trend, it's already usually too late to get involved with it. I mean, the community will have moved on in the 2 years it actually takes you to finish the project. But I mean, I've actually played randomized run Legends of Zelda a few times. I mean, 3 or 4 times. And I had a ball with it. It was something where I experienced the game almost to the same kind of experience that I had when I first tried it as a 6-year-old. I mean, everything felt new. I mean, the sense of mystery that it had. The randomizer has so much power to invoke those old feelings again. And despite the fact that they tell you not to chase a trend, I think to some extent it might have a timeless quality to it. And so it was something that we were really interested in pursuing, even though it didn't materialize as a stretch goal.
As a huge proponent of speedrunning, I can tell you that randomizer is definitely a very welcome feature. I've been, Soul will attest, I have been complaining that Nintendo needed to add in randomizer stuff into the Nintendo Switch Online app. I was like, if they do a Legend of Zelda SP, they should just make it a randomizer. It'd be perfect. It'd be a perfect thing to do. But I'm all for that. That's great.
I mean, there's really 2 things I think the community is demanding from Nintendo. They want a randomizer in a Zelda game, and they want a Zelda maker in the vein of a Mario maker. And I mean, there's various reasons I think for especially why the second doesn't exist. But I mean, that's again one of these really low-hanging fruits that for whatever reason Nintendo refuses to fulfill. And I think we really hit an opportunity there to give the community something they really demand.
Yeah, the makers, there's actually a standalone Mega Man maker that came out that was independently developed, and that was wonderful. But I'll get back on track here, Saul. I'm sorry. Let's see. Do you know hear that whip crack?
Did you hear that whip crack?
Do you know who's going to be handling your publishing for you? Is it going to be self-published, or do you have like a small run company coming up? Or
well, we have a company lined up to handle the actual physical manufacturing, and we can't really say due to NDA.
Sure.
I don't like saying that too often, but this is one where we really can't say.
Oh, we understand. We understand. I think what we're really looking for is just tell us.
Yeah. But yeah, the other side of the question, just a publisher in general. As an indie, I think you really have to be careful with that, because getting involved with a publisher too early can put too many strings on the project. It can kind of put you into some creative binds when they start putting creative pressure onto the projects. They start putting parameters onto it. I mean, you have the vision to create a 20-hour game, but they, for whatever reason, want a 5-hour game, and you just end up making all of these compromises. And there's a lot that a publisher can provide in terms of good marketing, I mean, resources. But at the point of development that we're in right now, I think that we're trying to stay publisher free, at least until the point where we have the game nearly finished. And from that point, we'll actually look at our options and see if it benefits us to take on a publisher from that point, I think.
Are there going to be any pack-in items, posters, keychains, manuals, or anything you can give us any information on?
Well, we absolutely have a manual. We've committed to that. So that's actually going to be printed up with the physical item. But other than that, we've really tried to stay pretty low on the physicals, because we know it's something that's hurt a lot of Kickstarters in the past. I mean, there's all sorts of logistic issues that you get into when you're trying to source them and ship them internationally. And it can take a much bigger bite of your funding than you think it will. Something that we did offer, we have PDF-based sheet music that we're offering as a digital. But then for people past the $250 mark, our guest composer, Hiroki Kikuta, is actually going to be signing the physical copies of that. And so that's a real treat for the few people who were able to nab up that. I think that was only about 25 or 30 people, though.
You had a special surprise announced with Dawnthorn and a bonus 8-bit style RPG, right? What I got this is kind of a two-part question. What made you decide to do this? And then did you happen to draw any inspiration from when Bloodstain did Curse of the Moon?
Believe it or not, it was completely independent of that project. It wasn't even in our mind. I wasn't even aware they did it. So we thought of the idea independently. I think Dawnthorn started sometime around June, July of 2018. And basically the concept was we were in a period of development where we were focusing on the dungeon items of the game. And we had a pretty good set up to that point, but we're always trying to play around with prototypes for new items. I mean, we're trying on, what if we have a laser that shoots an electrical ball that has some sort of puzzle facet to it and has some sort of combat facet. And we're always trying to come up with these new item ideas. And I mean, we had been through like 30 or 40 of these things. And the sense of fatigue had really started to set in, where we were saying, okay, we need to take some time out and just put this thing on the back burner for just a bit and give it a rest. And one of the things that we came up with as an idea for how to do that was we went back to the original design document for what Hazelnut Bastille was meant to be. We went back to that concept of like a 2 or 3 month project. And we said, why don't we just take a month and a half out and start working on that and just get our minds clear. And it'll allow us to do a number of things at once. It'll give us some experience with commercial publishing ahead of Hazelnut's release, which I think will be invaluable when we actually get to release Dawnthorn. It will give us the chance to have the same engine that Hazelnut is being built with, because more or less they're the same engine in Unity that we've adapted for other projects. And we'll be able to, I mean, we've been testing the engine for the last year, but testing it with 1,000 people versus testing it with 20,000 people is a whole different situation. So having the experience of having the engine in the hands of that many people at once and being able to work out all of the kinks at once, I think will make the Hazelnut release that much smoother. And so there's that aspect.
Just do me a big favor, make it an unlockable on the Switch version, something that you could unlock on.
People are demanding that.
That would be fantastic.
Well, why do I talk about that now? So people have suggested that we combine the two of those onto one disc. And I don't want to make a statement here because, I mean, people will find this recording. They will watch this show. And we're going to be hearing about it for the next 2 years if I say something here. So I can't commit to that. But it's something we're going to try, at least for the limited edition physical copy that we're actually offering the people from the Kickstarter. And it might have some relationship to Hazelnut in the game, but we'll see how that materializes. I mean,
it'll be great to find out what comes of that, though.
Yeah, I mean, at this point, we're just thinking we're going to release it on Steam. We'll see how it does there, and if it does well, there's a good shot you'll actually see it on the Switch platform as well, and maybe even the PS4. I mean, we'll see how it does. We have pretty high hopes for it.
So do we. I'm gonna let you pump something else here for a second. We're still on Hazelnut Bastille, but the Aloft Studio Discord is nicely active. I've been there for quite a while now. There always seems to be some sort of discussion about art direction or game theory going on. How in the vein of that, how settled are you and your team with the direction of Hazelnut Bastille so far? I mean, are you strong on that? You feel good with where you're at?
We feel pretty good about the core of the game itself in terms of the character controller, the concept of what the game is. The story is set in stone, and we've developed the NPCs pretty far. We have the major mechanics pretty well developed. I mean, a big part of the Hazelnut projects is getting design feedback, and that's something that's really shaped the project from the beginning. We had the prototype in the hands of the community, I think just 2 or 3 months into development, and it's really made a positive impact on the game so far. And one of the things that we've committed to due to the Kickstarter, it is offering people, I think it was at the $40 level, the chance to continue in that process as alpha testers, is what we're calling it. Mm-hmm. And that they'll continue giving design feedback at every major step of the way. And we're actually going to be offering a session with Dawnthorn pretty soon, where the people who paid for that tier will be able to jump in and test out all of the game items, test out the character controller and the enemy set that we currently have. And we'll get some feedback there. I mean, because you kind of want to have like a coherent picture between the relationship of your major combat items, how your enemies interact with the character, and how it relates to the growth of the character in the sense of being a Metroidvania over time. And you can kind of judge some of that as a developer. I mean, you sort of get an eye for that, but putting it into the hands of fans and players, I think gives you the next level of understanding of how people interact with the products.
You've kind of touched on some of the other projects that you have that you talked about bringing to life after Hazelnut Bastille. Mm-hmm. So I'll just move on to the second part of this question was,
sure.
Are you planning on taking a nice break after Hazelnut Bastille comes out, or?
I might take a break for maybe 2 months, 4 months, something like that. I mean, maybe do some traveling internationally. I mean, I've seen a big part of Europe during my lifetime, but I haven't gotten the chance to see Asia yet. And I'd like some time to maybe visit Japan and Thailand, maybe the mainland China, Taiwan. I mean, that'd be interesting. But
pick up some inspiration, that's for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
You pick up some dirt cheap NES games.
Yeah, sure. I mean, at the same time, I think people really underestimate the degree to which, as a game developer, doing something like this is really our deep life passion, and you kind of feel like you're missing part of your life when you're not doing development for more than a month, and so even if it's our intention to spend all of that time, I mean, having some R&R, I think I'm going to be pushing myself right back into a development project, whether I like it or not. I mean, it's kind of a part of me at this point.
So Hazelnut Bastille is an open story, so a direct sequel could be possible someday, or is there just going to be a satisfying conclusion that's going to enable you to move on and focus on other projects?
So Hazelnut and Dawnthorn have a pretty close relationship. There's a character in the story of Hazelnut Bastille that you kind of meet in a tangential way, and you don't learn very much about this character through the course of Hazelnut, but his entire story is told through the course of Dawnthorn. And so in that sense, there is an extended universe, and at least in the sense that it encompasses those two games. But at the same time, the ending of Hazelnut, as we currently conceive it, has a lot of finality to it for a lot of reasons. And so it will probably be a project that's more or less closed between those two games. I don't picture there being another game in that universe. I mean, it's possible, but I think we're going to move on to other projects after that.
The Smash Brothers version of Hazelnut Bastille.
Blade Strangers.
Blade Strangers. Yeah, exactly. Hazelnut Bastille Kart.
Mm-hmm.
Ooh, a kart racer. That'd be good.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh,
we don't have too many of those on Switch.
Yeah, there's only like 8 on the Switch right now. Room for plenty more.
So that kind of takes care of all the main questions we have. We generally keep it to around 20 or so questions. a little bit more, a little bit less. But at the end of our interviews, we always have a bonus question. And the bonus question can be kind of topical with the interview that we're doing, but it usually doesn't have anything to do with the game or the development of games or anything in particular. It's kind of just like an off-the-wall question. So
yes,
for you, the question we came up with was, if you were going to design a themed drink around the game and call it a hazelnut Bastille, what would the base of the drink be, and what would the final taste be described as?
I did not see this coming.
You're not the first person to go silent after we've asked these questions. So
let's see. I mean, what am I even gonna say, man? So okay, so you definitely have to have some ground up hazelnut in there. I mean that's a given. What would accompany hazelnut? I mean, maybe like a smooth, creamy matcha, maybe a little bit of a raspberry flavor. I mean, let's see. I mean, given that it's Anatolia, I mean, maybe something else, a little Turkish to throw in there. I mean, some sort of aperitif layer, maybe. So
I'm thinking he's already thought this out. Is really what it is.
he's playing coy. He knows what's going on.
he's already started to write the menu on this stuff.
There's your pack-in item. You just make a little cue card that has the hazelnut Bastille drink formula on there and pack that in.
See, that's where there needs to be an OTS bar in the game that serves the drink. That's all I'm saying.
One of these days we'll get featured in a game. Don't you worry, Saul.
I'm working on it. I'm going to keep pushing for this. Well, Dennis, I wanted to give you one last chance here before we kind of wrap things up to just anything that you want to share with anybody. If you got any special tidbits, any shout outs, anything you want to mention to the listeners, the fans, that type of thing. It's an open forum right now. You're able to talk about whatever you want here.
You can pimp your social medias if you want to.
That's right.
Honestly, we're just kind of keeping our heads down at this point. we're trying to put our nose to the grindstone, really. I mean, there's not a whole lot to say. I mean, we don't have any huge announcements coming on. I mean, we're just trying to keep grinding and plugging along. I mean, it's kind of anticlimactic for this slot. I apologize.
No, it's great. I mean, I think all of the people that have backed the project that are very much looking forward to it, and even those that were watching that maybe they couldn't back the project at the time, that are kind of anticipating a physical release and hoping that they can jump on board after the fact.
Right.
You know, I think they're all probably really anxious to see you get that product out there, because it's super promising. I mean, everything that I've seen, it's a beautiful looking product. The game is the artwork is amazing. The feel is very Zelda-like, but with its own flavor, its own style, right? Something that still screams, you know, that it's its own thing, but with this hint of, if you liked the Zelda product, you're probably gonna like this too. So that's what I'm reading from it.
Yeah, you just reminded me of one thing. We had the plan to open up late backing sometime early in January, and obviously that hasn't materialized yet. But I mean, we have a few business prereqs right now that we're sorting out to make that possible. And that's something I don't want to set a date for, but I mean, that should be somewhat imminent at this point. People who didn't get a chance to back during the Kickstarter itself will have another shot at least some of the tiers. And we do plan to be offering the physical copy to people for a very long time to come, and for the normal price that we had during the Kickstarter. So you will be able to get in on that. And that's not slightly motivated by the very high mandatory minimums that you have to actually manufacturing the PlayStation 4 and the Nintendo Switch copies. So I mean, we'll have to boost our numbers somewhat through sales of the physicals through development, I think. So stay tuned.
I don't think you're going to have any problem selling those once people see it. You're going to do just fine.
Yeah, I'm pretty comfortable about how things are going. I think we'll be pretty safe.
Well, I got to tell you, it's been a great pleasure to speak with you. Thank you for spending some time with us on the shelf. And we would love to have you on at some point in the future. Maybe when you guys are about ready to release, maybe we could have you back on for a little bit.
Sure. I mean, maybe we can hop in for the release of Dawnthorn, maybe. I mean,
that'd be wonderful.
Projected for this spring sometime. So that's something
we would love to have you here. Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Dennis, thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thanks for putting in the due diligence to wrestle my arm back and get me on the show.
We've been looking forward to it. We think it's great what you're doing. So thank you very much. Yeah.
Thank you.
We'd like to thank Dennis Varvaro and Aloft Studio again for taking some time out to talk to two lowly people in the Nintendo Switch and in video game collecting community running this humble little podcast. We appreciate everybody who takes time out to speak with us. So thanks again.
And now, this month in gaming history.
You got to get more oomph to that.
Is that too much?
No,
I should do it again.
This month
and now
in gaming history.
Oh, see, you're adding too much of the. How about this? And now, this month in gaming history. Is that good? Can we go with that?
We'll work on it.
February of 1980. One of my favorite studios, HAL Laboratory Inc., was founded. So for our first month in gaming history segment, I thought I would try to find something really cool that has a strong connection to Nintendo. And on February 21st, 1980, the company that brought you such hits as Mingle Magnet, Vegas Stakes, and Face Pilot was formed.
1980 was one of your favorite years too, right? You remember that? You remember 1980?
Yes, I was a mere 2 years old. I wasn't
born yet, so. Of course, you probably know HAL Studios better for some of their other creations, such as the Mother series, the Kirby series, and various Pokemon Snap or Stadium games.
Among notable names from HAL Labs are Masahiro Sakurai, the creator of both Kirby and Super Smash Bros., as well as Satoru Iwata, the former president of Nintendo.
The first game that HAL worked on for the Famicom and NES was, in fact, not Kirby. When they wanted to secure a license from Nintendo to develop for the system, they were first tasked with picking up the slack on the NES Pinball, which they were able to help push out.
HAL Labs did not begin their game development on the NES, however. HAL Labs is credited with creating a number of clone games, among them a game called Taxman for the Apple II back in 1981, which is essentially a low-rent Pac-Man clone.
I don't think I could enjoy a game called Taxman, but they also created clones for Galaxian, Lunar Lander, Night Driver, Rally X, and Space Invaders for the VIC-20, among a few other VIC-20 and Commodore 64 games.
They developed about 30 games for the MSX and MSX2, as well as a few games in the Agerlin series.
Eventually, HAL went on to become one of Nintendo's most prolific partners, having developed many games for every console and handheld system except the beautiful, beautiful Virtual Boy.
See, I left that for you to say, just to see if you would catch on.
You know I had to.
Now, in fact, HAL had even developed a game for mobile called Part-Time UFO, which is available for both Android and iOS. And I think that's only $3.99 when I looked.
Kirby continues to be a massive character in his own right in gaming, and there are over 25 games connected to the mainline series, not to mention the connection to Super Smash Bros.
He even has his own anime series titled Kirby Right Back At Ya, produced by the jointly owned company Warp Star Inc. from Nintendo and HAL Laboratory.
The continuing influence of HAL Labs in gaming is a strong testament to the strength of their creations and the love that their fans have for them.
And that's what happened this month in gaming history.
We really need to work on that.
I'll get better. You gotta give it time. That was only the first time.
You promised to get better in a lot of things. I'm still waiting.
Wow. Cut me to the bone.
To the bone, sir. that's going to bring us to our second interview of the episode. And this time, it is one that we have been waiting for a little while. A little bit.
It is our pleasure to welcome our next special guest, Henry Hoffman, creator of the game Hue. Welcome to the show, Henry.
Hey, thanks very much for having me.
So as you know, we've been working on having you as a guest since last year, and you've been super busy, but we are very excited to have you with us finally.
Yeah, thanks so much for your patience. It's great to be here.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. Can you give our audience a little taste of some of your work for those that may not be familiar?
Sure thing. So I've been sort of an indie game developer for the last sort of 8 years or so now. Coming out of university, I made a game called Mush, which is sort of a mobile game all about manipulating your emotions through touch and through sort of shaking your phone and doing a bunch of crazy stuff. But then I did a bunch more experimental work. I made a virtual reality game called Aboard the Looking Glass, using sort of hand tracking. So you look through your hands into the past and the future in order to manipulate the present. But probably the game that I'm most known for is the game Hue, which is a puzzle platformer on sort of all consoles and PC. And it's all about sort of the philosophy of color and whether you can sort of alter your reality in ways that you wouldn't expect through sort of changing your surroundings. And the game is all about this character called Hugh, who's a young boy, and his mother studies the theory of colors in a completely black and white world. And you go off on this sort of big adventure to try and discover her research and find out sort of why she's disappeared under these mysterious circumstances.
All right, I'm not going to lie. I've been dying to play Hue, and I've watched footage multiple times, but I kind of keep holding out for it to maybe come to the Switch. I really want to ask that question, but I'm going to ask you a different one. So let's just talk a bit about how the concept for Hue came about.
Sure. So I've got a very sort of specific way that I approach game design, and it's kind of like a mechanic first approach, where what really excites me about video games and video game design is that it's such a new medium that there's a bunch of different sort of interactions that haven't necessarily been explored yet. And I love the idea that there's all these game mechanics that kind of exist currently, but then if we kind of push a little bit at the boundaries of what games can be, there's sort of all this uncharted territory. So the way that I approach games is trying to come up with new game mechanics that haven't been explored yet, and then building out a world and a universe sort of outwards from that. And Hue started very simply, where I was in Photoshop and I had multiple layers in Photoshop, and the background was a color, and then I had just a square, I think it was, on another layer, and that was another color. And what I loved is when I changed the hue slider on the background, so it would go shift from sort of red to blue, and I had a blue object in front of it, that sort of visibly disappeared. Just by changing the hue, I was able to sort of alter the visibility of this object. And I thought, well, it's interesting that it kind of visibly disappears, but what if this object also physically disappears? And I thought there was a sort of great potential for some sort of game mechanic in that. And that's kind of the very beginning of the idea. And then I built outwards from that and was like, well, what if we have a color wheel? And what if you can use sort of an analog stick in this sort of circular motion to select these different colors? And what if there's sort of this story and this narrative sort of all based around color theory? And that was kind of the very beginning of the game. And in sort of 2 weeks, I was able to put together a very rough prototype, which still has a lot of the things that made it through into the final game. There's sort of the color wheel, the analog stick control system, and this sort of very core sort of color mechanic where things disappear when they match the background color. Yeah, and then we just went into full development and turned it into a game from there. It's amazing how much sort of from those first 2 weeks made it into that final game.
How long was Hue under development?
So it was about 2 years in development. It was originally supposed to be 9 months, I think, but we ran a little bit over.
When working on a game like Hue, did your dreams get taken over by the colorful atmosphere of the world you were creating?
That's a good question. So not so much my dreams themselves, but one thing that I did notice is that I was working on this game sometimes sort of 16 hours a day, and the backgrounds are sort of very vibrant. And I did notice that I was starting to get sort of burnout almost. You know, like when you get sort of screen burnout for having an image on screen for too long. I was looking at these bright colors sort of all day, every day, and it started to have sort of a mild effect on my vision. So yeah, there was definitely some repercussions for working on such a colorful game.
You know, it's interesting that you mentioned color there, and we talk about that with hue because it's so central to what that game is. But color, it seems to be it plays a pivotal role in a number of the games that you've had some involvement in. Because aside from hue, you have Cube or even Mortal Melon that come to mind. What is the importance of color to you with regards to game design?
It's interesting because Hue is the first game that uses color sort of mechanically, sort of as very sort of core to the game mechanic itself. But I come from sort of much more of an artistic background than a programming background. So color theory has always been really sort of instrumental in developing sort of aesthetics for the games that I work on. The very first game that I made, which was the very first commercial game that I made at least, was called Mush. And that was all about different emotions. And each character, although you were able to change your character's emotions, and each emotion had a different mechanic. But the way that we were able to really differentiate those emotions and sort of transforming between those emotions was using sort of color representation for them. So like blue would be sad, yellow would be happy, red would be angry. And I think that was the very first time that we realized that color is a great sort of signifier for game mechanics in order to sort of differentiate between various states, I guess you would say.
You talked a little bit earlier about your approach to the development, but when you think of just that first initial entry into the game, are you doing that in a kind of a visual design thought process, or is your mind strictly in the mechanics? Is it some sort of blend?
Yeah, so for me, it is very mechanic focused, and it's very much about how can we introduce the player to these to this way of interacting with a game that they maybe haven't experienced with sort of before, and can we do this in a way that that surprises the player essentially, and it's very sort of mechanic focused almost every step of the way. Like when we're introducing new mechanics, when we're introducing new levels, the way we set pacing, everything like that is sort of mechanic focused, and it's kind of we build outwards from that in order to sort of divulge narrative and to tell story and to sort of add contextual framework to the game. So, for example, the way that I was sort of designing the pacing of the game, you would sort of go into a level, and then there would be this introduction of a new mechanic that you hadn't experienced previously, and then the next level would maybe build on that, and it would combine that with previous mechanics that you've already experienced, and then the next level would maybe add much more complexity with a bunch of different mechanics that you've combined, and then we would add sort of an action element to it, and there would be sort of some skill-based gameplay in the next level, and then what we would do is you would kind of reach the peak of that kind of rhythm of that gameplay, and we would add a lull there, and that lull would be kind of a corridor sequence where we're divulging narrative. And so it was very much the way that we designed the introduction of different mechanics that we were able to design where the narrative gets disclosed and how the story frames everything else.
See, I guess I'm thinking a lot about the combination of that mechanic within Hue and how that works with the beauty of the visual elements within the game. And at some point, you have to make a leap between, okay, we know how this game works, but what does this game look like? And that's what kind of drew me to that question, the idea of that, because the visuals on the game are so stunning that it almost makes me think that was central in some way to the design, but it sounds like you're saying that didn't come until some later stage.
No, the aesthetics and the narrative and everything was kind of developed together. But what's really interesting about the aesthetic style is that it was born almost directly from the mechanical limitations that we had from the core game mechanic. Because the thing is, you've got this game mechanic where you're changing the background color, and that background color needs to be flat in order for the sort of visual effect of objects disappearing into it in order to sort of work. Which meant that we'd already got this restriction where the background color had to be a flat color, foreground sort of colored objects have to be flat color, which meant that we were very restricted as to how do we build the environment. And that could only be black or white. So we developed these rules, these internal rules, where anything solid was going to be black and anything sort of gas or liquid was going to be white. And that's how we would sort of differentiate between those elements. So we've already developed this very strict set of rules. And one of the struggles that I had very early on with this aesthetic, we actually took inspiration from some sort of minimalist graphic designers like Saul Bass, who designed sort of a lot of movie posters. And we really wanted to move in this direction because it was going to make it very easy for us to create a large number of environments with minimal art resource. But we ran into the problem where we're using these sort of big blocked out black areas and blocked out white areas, and we weren't able to communicate sort of diversity between the environments. Kind of, if we had a jungle themed world, it looked almost identical to the village or to sort of the electrical world. Like we weren't able to communicate that diversity. So what we started doing is taking inspiration from shadow puppetry, where they cut out this really intricate negative space into the shadow puppets in order to communicate sort of detailing. And taking inspiration from that, we started to do the same thing. We started to chip away and cut out sort of detailing out of the environment and everything else. And we ended up with this sort of quite intricate sort of shadow puppetry inspired aesthetic that, if you trace it all the way back, was born directly out of those mechanical restraints that we had from the game mechanic.
I'm going to shift away a little bit from the development of the game and just kind of ask a different question here. There's a lot of indie devs that will throw in nice support for like speedrunners. Did you ever imagine that Hue, which is the game averages about 4.5 hours in playtime, assuming that you're not collecting all the beakers and letters. Did you imagine it would have a challenge for people trying to beat it in under 50 minutes? Because I think the world record is like 40 some minutes.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, no, the whole speedrunning aspect came very much as a surprise to me. I'd kind of designed it as this kind of slow-paced, sort of puzzle-driven game, and the very idea that people were going to be sort of racing through it was kind of counter to my initial sort of design intention. But then actually when I started seeing the speedruns and stuff post-release, I thought it was amazing what people were able to achieve. The way that they were able to break some of my puzzles in order to get through the levels quicker. It was amazing, really.
Do you want to take some of that knowledge back into Hue at some point?
Possibly not into Hue, but I definitely think that speedrunning is something that I'm going to consider much more with games going forwards. And I would love to be able to add sort of ways that I can improve that sort of speedrunning experience for speedrunners into the game itself.
So I have it on good authority that you've got some really strong feelings about accessibility in gaming and colorblindness in particular.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's kind of something that I fell into without really expecting to. It's kind of expecting it, really. When I first put together the prototype of Hue, we had only built it in sort of a couple of weeks, but we were going around events sort of showcasing it very early on to get feedback. One of the things we noticed very quickly was that there was a significant subset of people that weren't able to play the game at all. They were not able to differentiate between the colors purely from looking at them. And we did a bit of research and we realized it's because like sort of 10% of the population suffer from color blindness in some form. And we posted sort of a quick video of the game onto the colorblind subreddit, where a bunch of people offered a ton of support. They offered us lots of advice, and we eventually got in touch with Ian Hamilton, who's an accessibility advocate based here in the UK, and he offered us sort of a lot of advice. So we ended up building our own sort of symbol system that's sort of accessible from the options menu of Hue, where you can add symbols to each individual sort of colored object and their corresponding color on your color wheel. So people that suffer from color blindness can sort of differentiate them with the secondary system. But what we also started finding is that people that didn't suffer from color blindness also turned this option on because it made it easier to differentiate between those objects. And actually a lot of people liked using that mode even if they didn't have sort of color blindness at all.
I think it's fantastic that you've consciously made an effort to do that.
Thanks very much. Yeah, and since then I've sort of given talks at Game Accessibility Conference and tried to really sort of advocate adding these features to your game. Because one thing I noticed as well is if you place value in sort of review scores, which a lot of game publishers and game developers do, if you look through our Metacritic ratings, nearly every good review mentions the fact that we've added these sort of accessibility features for players. And I think it's a real, I just think it's really important that developers are aware of this, that reviewers are paying attention to it, that players are paying attention to it, and that it's going to really boost the sort of positive reception of your game.
With color being such a focal point, do you believe that a good score and well flushed out sound effects can help accentuate the importance of color and content?
Yeah, absolutely. And the soundtrack played sort of a huge part of Hue, really. We ended up releasing a vinyl that was one of my sort of proudest achievements with the game. But it was funny because I originally found this sort of musical track online, which was kind of a classical piano track. It was stock audio, I think it was. And I downloaded it, integrated it into the game, and it fitted perfectly. So we tried to hire a composer to kind of replicate that audio. And we got through various tracks, and actually none of it was really coming close. It was much too digital, and it didn't really fit the game. So I went back to where the source of that original sort of classical track, and I kind of looked at the profile, and I knew it was sort of a Greek composer. And we were based in London at the time, and they could have been anywhere in the world. But I approached them, and I was like, "We really like this track that you did. Would you be interested in doing sort of composing for this game that I'm working on?" And it turns out that this Greek composer was 20 minutes away down the road in London, and he'd just watched Indie Game the movie the night before, so really wanted to compose an indie game soundtrack. So the chances were absolutely out of this world, really. But we ended up working with him for a sort of a year on the project, and it was a very sort of intimate working relationship where I was kind of building levels in his room whilst he was at the same time composing sort of the music to the game, sort of in tandem, really.
Truly amazing. It's so strange how that can work itself out.
Yeah, absolutely. It was a huge coincidence, but hugely beneficial to the game, I think.
So you spent some time working in virtual reality, as you mentioned, with Aboard the Looking Glass, which I think is a terrific concept for a game. And I believe that this was your first prize-winning entry into Leap Motion's 3D Jam. The game was developed in about 1 week. Do I have that right?
Yeah, so it was 7 days. It was 7 sort of full days of development, but that was spread out over a month because I was actually working on Hue. I'd just started full-time development on Hue, so I was only able to do this in my spare time.
I'm just I guess I'm beside myself with how a concept like that can turn into a reality in 7 days of work.
Yeah, it was funny because so the game Jam itself was trying to use this Leap Motion technology, which is this hand tracking technology, and I'd gone through like about 10 different ideas on paper, trying to figure out a way that I could use this technology in a way kind of that hadn't been done before. Because as I said previously, that's pretty much my way of working, where I try and come up with mechanics that haven't been explored before. And I'd kind of exhausted all my options, and I was laying in bed, and I had my hands up above my head, and I was staring into my hands, like trying to think about what can I possibly do with these hands that hasn't been done before. And I started to zone out. And as I started to zone out, I started to look sort of beyond my hands, almost through my hands. And I started to think, well, what if I wasn't looking at my hands and my hands weren't actually doing things, which is what you would expect? What if my hands were portals and I was looking through them? And that's kind of how that game idea came around.
I would imagine that your experience in virtual reality gave you some interesting thoughts about where you would take that platform in the future. How close are we to something that is truly more viable to the mass market versus where we are today?
So I think that's a difficult question. I think there's still such a barrier to entry that I think we're several years off sort of mass adoption. And I don't know. I think until sort of playing a game in virtual reality or augmented reality, for that matter, is easier and more convenient than playing it on a games console or on a PC or on a Switch, I just don't see that widespread adoption happening.
You don't think that VR could replace consoles as we know it, or they'll even expand home consoles going forward?
I think there's potential, but I think it needs to be more convenient. I think players need to be able to be like, I want to play VR because it's easier than playing on my TV. And whilst I love immersion, until it's also more convenient, I just don't see that it's going to take off in that way.
Is there a particular game or genre that you think would benefit from a VR remake?
I don't think there's anything that's not been explored yet. And what I would like to see is sort of real world games. So games like Ingress and Pokemon Go and everything else, which use augmented reality. I would like to see some sort of real world application, maybe some sort of fitness game crossover that encourages people to go out in the real world and use real world locations. I think it's been explored on mobile, but I would like to see how that could get explored in some sort of mobile headset. I know that a bunch of high profile sort of platforms are working on sort of mobile headsets for augmented reality stuff. So maybe something like that in the future could be the breakthrough.
So you've been focusing on augmented reality for a bit now. What drew you to that space?
So I'm generally just fascinated with new technology. When I'm looking at game mechanics and what game mechanics can do, usually it's limited by the technology that it's kind of executed on. And I thought augmented reality is just an interesting sort of area to explore creatively, more so than maybe sort of producing sort of consumer viable products. I just think it's an interesting sort of way to explore how we can interact with media.
Can you tell us a little bit about Reality Clash?
Sure. So that's not really a big project that I'm a part of. That was just kind of a project that I got commissioned to offer some sort of consultations and development work on. But it is sort of like this massively multiplayer augmented reality sort of first-person shooter game. So I thought it's incredibly interesting what they're able to achieve on sort of a massive scale using some of these technologies. But yeah, that's definitely not something that I've been sort of instrumental in.
What is your role for that, if you can tell us?
Yeah, it's just offering sort of development support. I designed some of the AI systems and some stuff like that.
I understand the game also uses cryptocurrency. How does that work? Do you know much about that?
So that's kind of very much a different platform. I think they've got like some sort of online marketplace where you can buy into their online store, I think, and then you can play the game separately. But what I do know is that platform holders are very cautious, I think, about those sort of relationships between sort of external storefronts and sort of in-game currency. But that's kind of outside of my remit. I very much just kind of worked on the development side.
With the neat use of mobile platform cameras and backing a real-time game with blockchain, what's a neat gimmick or accessory that a system has, such as the PSVR or the PS Move, iToy, Kinect, Joy-Con, motion controls? What accessory on a system do you think could have barely scratched the surface of good use, or which do you think was or is destined to fall away as being poorly executed?
So that's a good question. I mean, what I really loved was the Kinects. There was a great game, I've forgotten what it's called, where you play as the Kinects and it maps your body, and your body is a mask. It's an indie game, and you've got these two worlds overlaid, and your body is a mask, and you kind of use your body to mask the different worlds, and you can have this little character that runs through the world. I thought it was an incredibly innovative use of body tracking, and I would have loved to have seen a whole bunch more sort of body tracking games. And actually, with augmented reality, we're kind of seeing it sort of slowly appear on mobile, where we're able to sort of body track people and use sort of real-time skeleton creation. So I think there's going to be a bit of a resurgence in sort of real-time body tracking, and I'll be kind of excited to see how that can be utilized in games.
To stay on with the kind of similarities there between the two, I also see a big divide between the Kinect, which is the third person point of view, versus what you might see from, say, a phone game where it's the first person looking outwards. And there's definitely some differences in how each of those can behave. I mean, sure, you can have a camera that becomes your third person and looks back at you with the selfie camera, but that's also a dramatically different way of using that tool than what you see in most augmented reality, say Pokemon Go, where you're walking around and you're pointing your phone and you're using the outbound look, and you're doing that from first person point of view.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm doing some design around this at the moment. It's funny you should mention it. And the one of the main limitations with this is that you're kind of dependent on an additional person. You need to have one person looking out, and you also need to have one person that's having their body tracked. So suddenly you've got this two-person dependency, whereas with platforms like the Kinect, you could play it by yourself in your home, and that wasn't going to be a problem. So suddenly it becomes a much more social experience, and there's going to be some challenges there as to how that translates to sort of a single-player experience.
I think was the game you're talking about, was that FRU? FRU?
Yeah, that's the game.
Now, the indie gaming development culture has undergone a lot of scrutiny over the past year, and in late 2018, it became a very hot topic on Twitter. What is your take on things like development time crunches, the pay scale, and even the business practices of some developers who have had to close their doors due to poor decision making?
Yeah, I think it's unfortunate. I absolutely condemn any sort of crunch culture and people being forced, feeling like they're being forced to kind of work unsociable hours. I've been fortunate really that I've never had to be part of a AAA studio or even really a mid-tier studio. So a lot of the sort of business decisions I make are just purely project based. It's like based on the game. And usually it's I'm the only person, I'm the only developer. So I'm the only person that kind of suffers from any of those decisions that I'm pretty much making by myself.
A lot of high pressure then.
Yeah, absolutely. But when it comes to bigger studios, I think it's a real concern. And I think management, sort of studio management, is very much a skill by itself. I've seen it when studios go from small to sort of just mid-size, that the amount of sort of project management that you need to go through, and the processes become so much different to when you're running an indie studio. And if you take that for granted and you take your staff for granted, then sort of everything starts to slip, and suddenly you're not able to time keep, and everything kind of goes a bit pear-shaped. And I think if you're trying to foster sort of a culture of goodwill, it's really important to look after your staff and for everyone to have a really good work-life balance.
Well, I'm really worried about the idea of this still somewhat being looked at as a AAA gaming studio problem, because I think we've seen things like Telltale, who had to close their doors, which they're larger, but they're by no means a giant AAA studio in the sense of something, say, Blizzard, and yet we saw what seems to be some probable mismanagement of that studio having to close the doors the way that they did.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think probably my scaling of studios is slightly different to yours. I feel like any company over 20 people is sort of massive in my mind. So I think Telltale probably suffered the sort of some of the same problems that a AAA studio suffers, where there's a sort of board of directors and people making decisions that are maybe financially motivated rather than motivated by sort of the long-term sustainability of the company. Yeah, and I think it's
creativity. I would say that from what I can see on very small studios, the ones that are in the size that you're talking about for being small studios, a lot of them tend to be driven by creativity.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't think sustainability and creativity are mutually exclusive. No. I think if you're creating really sort of creative content, there's going to be an audience for that, and that's going to keep your company going. I think if you make something really creative and it's really successful, and then you're like, that was really successful, let's just keep doing that, and then you just churn out clones of this original idea that you once had and suddenly becomes stale, that's when I feel like you're losing sight of sustainability and creativity.
Was developing games your dream job, or did you plan to do something else and just kind of fall into developing games?
No, absolutely. I've been making video games since I was 9 years old. We got our first family computer, I think I was 8 years old. And my father came home one day with a copy of Planet PC magazine, which is a games magazine aimed at children. And I had a copy of Click and Play on the magazine cover, which I installed, and I made something like over 100 different games between the ages of 9 and 12, I think it was. And then I got a copy of the same magazine, and it came with a copy of Blender. And then I started making 3D games using that. And I joined a fan forum for a game which I loved as a kid called Little Big Adventure. And that community really encouraged me to create a bunch of fan art and fan games and stuff like that. And then I went to university and I studied video games. So I've been making video games all the way from 9 years old up to 30, which is where I am now.
Started on a Texas Instruments calculator on a TI-81. That's where I started making games.
Very cool.
So what's next? Is there anything on the horizon that you can tell us about?
So nothing that's been announced yet, but on Hue, I did a sort of a little bit of collaboration with my little brother, Frederick Hoffman. He did some of the sort of village design and some of the intricate detailing on some of the buildings. And me and him are collaborating on a new venture, which takes some of the core sort of tenets from Hue and the design of Hue, sort of creative, mechanic-driven gameplay, and kind of applying that to a new project that's only just kind of in its infancy, really.
Before I get to our bonus question, because we usually have a bonus question at the end, and to be fair, the bonus question has almost literally nothing to do with the rest of what we've talked about most of the time, or at least is only tangential in nature. But, you know, I can't hold it anymore. I do have to ask, is there any chance that the Switch will be able to play Hue at some point in the future?
All I can say is that it's 100% on our radar. But nothing has been announced yet.
Understood. Well, I can tell you that there are a lot of people that desperately want to be able to play that. So we're kind of pulling for that. We're hoping for that, me included. I kind of want that experience to be on that platform. It's a wonderful platform, as I'm sure you already know.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, there's one thing I can ask you guys and your listeners to do in order to accelerate that process a little bit. If you could tweet at Super Rare Games and hassle them to do sort of a physical version of Hue on Switch, I'm sure that would kind of potentially accelerate the process a little bit.
I can tell you right now that there are probably tens of people thinking about typing to George right now.
That's brilliant.
So again, on to that particular bonus question. So again, this doesn't necessarily have anything to do with all of the previous stuff most of the times, although this one does have a little bit to do with some of that. When do we get to see a game that combines the talents of both you and Anissa together? And wouldn't the Switch be a perfect platform to debut it on?
That's an amazing question. She's actually right here next to me. She's just arrived. But, well, she's moving. 1 second. I think that would be interesting. Anissa's sort of forte is very different to my own. She's working in sort of a larger studio doing UI and UX design. And sort of the projects that I'm doing don't necessarily have a huge amount of UI and UX. But also, I think we would be terrible at working together. We would argue all the time. She's making angry faces at me now.
Tell her to say hi to the people, hi to the listeners.
Do you want to say hi to the listeners?
Hello.
Yeah, I think it would be great at some point if you guys got together to put something together for everyone. I know that the talents are a little different, but I think there's something there that could be done.
Yeah, absolutely. And actually, I do keep trying to prod her to go indie. So maybe if I can get her to go indie, then there's more of a chance.
I want to say thank you so much, Henry, for taking the time out of your very busy schedule and all of your globe trotting to spend a little bit of time with us and talk to us about Hue and about some of the things we've gone over. Is there anything else you want to share or tell our listeners?
No, I'd just like to say if you haven't played Hue, just to give it a go. Hopefully it'll be on Switch soon, but it's on kind of every other console and PC platform in the meantime. But yeah, thanks very much for checking out my stuff and having me on the show.
It's been a pleasure. And hopefully if something does develop further on that aspect, we can have you back.
Absolutely, yeah.
Well, Henry, thanks a bunch and we wish you the best.
Brilliant. Thank you very much.
What a pleasure it was to speak with Henry. I can't wait to see if Hue is going to make it over to the Switch and also some of his future projects. What a brilliant developer. How can we possibly follow up 2 wonderful interviews with developers? I know. How about another interview?
This time we'll pick somebody from the community. We'll have a nice little sit-down chit-chat.
This begins our new segment where we are going to do a collector profile every month. I've been looking forward to this since we sort of talked about this. We've had a couple other collectors on the show in different capacities, but this is going to be a little different. Today, we're just going to jump right into some questions. Question number 1. Who are you and what do you collect?
Hey, I'm Welch's.
I collect all sorts of things. Video game wise, I collect games for the Nintendo Switch, obviously. I also collect Wii U games. I probably have about a third of the collection, the library. I also have a Wii U kiosk, an Amiibo kiosk. Let's see, I have Zelda Amiibos. I collect all the Zelda Amiibos. Not really big into all the Amiibos, but just the Zelda ones. Let's see here. I also collect non-video game stuff. I collect soccer scarves. I'm still waiting for Super Rare George to get me a soccer scarf there. I collect shot glasses. It's kind of random. But other than that,
I collect pint glasses.
So. Nice. Yeah, whenever I travel to go anywhere, I try to pick up a shot glass. So I think that's about it as far as what I collect. Oh, wait, no, I have NES games too. I have a relatively decent NES collection. I think I have 170 or so games. Not too shabby. I also collect kids. I have 3 of those. Probably have 1 or 2.
Those are really expensive. Right? Yeah.
And it's very dangerous picking those up for collecting too. You got to be real careful where you go do that. You know,
I find it's best if you make your own instead of buying them.
Yeah. I try to stick with that, but I'd be fine with 3, but I think we might end up having a couple more. Kind of crazy, but hey, life's short, right?
It gets shorter the more kids you have.
I know, right? But yeah, I think that's about it as far as what I collect.
So the next question is going to be, why are games important to you?
Why are games important to me? For me, especially with the kids situation, I don't have a lot of free time, so games to me is just a big escape. Kind of crazy reality that I live in. I love it, but the games to me is my only way to escape typically. So for me, having that game time, it's very crucial to keeping sane. So
sanity is important.
Yes, very much so.
What was the first video game you ever played?
First video game I ever played. Kind of a standard response, but it was Super Mario Brothers, Duck Hunt. My soon-to-be stepdad at the time, I would think I was 6. He bought us a Nintendo classic or an NES classic, and he brought it home. It was me and my 6 brothers, and I think someone had a birthday or something, because there was a bunch of friends over too, staying the night. So there was like me, my 6 brothers, all these friends just gathered around in the dark, just playing Super Mario Brothers, Duck Hunt all night long. So it was quite an experience at the time. It seems to be a common first game, but I was 6 at the time. That's what I grew up with, was the old Nintendo. Never had a Super Nintendo though.
We're around the same age then. See, Soul played older games with like rocks and stuff, so...
Yeah, right. Marbles.
We had to walk to school uphill both ways.
While being chased by velociraptors. So
still owed $1 by Jesus. Gotta collect on that someday.
Nice.
What are your top 3 favorite games of all time?
Oh, top 3 favorite games of all time. I think Final Fantasy X is one of my favorite games. I'm a big Final Fantasy fan. I was a senior in high school when that came out, so I was really looking forward to that. It was a big change in the series. Really like the way they changed the 3D and everything. It's been a long time since I played it, but I think Super Mario RPG is another one of my favorites from way back in the day.
It's a good choice.
I'd love if they brought it to the Switch somehow, some way, even if it's online or something. Oh man, it's a tough one. I hate to go back to like Final Fantasy VII or something. I'm gonna have to go with the Zelda game, Ocarina of Time. I know it's a classic, but yeah, definitely a solid one for me.
We would have also accepted Yo Noid on the NES.
Yo Noid? Oh yeah.
Or Cool Spot.
Cool Spot, yeah. Well, Ice Climbers is up there for me too. I don't know.
No. We said 3, not 4. You have to, narrow it down.
All right.
So what
I
is
played so much Ice Climbers? It was crazy growing up.
What is the worst game you've ever played?
The worst game I've ever played. My parents would probably kill me for saying this, but it's got to be Bible Adventures for the NES. You guys ever played that?
You may be the first person I know that's actually played that.
Oh, it was like a blue cart, I think, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah. It was so bad. You had you were like David, like trying to beat Goliath and throwing like sheep at people and stuff. It was so weird.
I've booted it up, but I have talked myself out of playing it at the start screen. What's the
probably a good choice?
What is your most prized video game related possession?
Most prized video game related possession. I mean, I've gotten some recent Switch things that are pretty cool, like the Thimbleweed Park. I got autographed by the whole limited run team, so that's a pretty cool thing I have. Probably gonna have to go with the crazy collector's edition I got for the Switch with the swords for Nobunaga's Ambition Taishi. I think it's how it's pronounced. It has a katana and a dagger with it, so it's pretty sweet. Cost me a hefty chunk of change.
Yeah, you're one of two people I know that. Yeah. There's only one other person I know of in the community that has one.
Yeah, so I think most prized video game related possession would have to be that.
Who is your favorite video game character?
I might just have to go back to Final Fantasy X. Tidus, man. Gotta go with that. Sorry.
I gave you a pass on Final Fantasy X being a favorite game, but Tidus being your favorite character? Come on.
I don't know, man. It was just such a classic game for me at the time. I was senior in high school, man. Coming of age. Come on. It was just my favorite game. It stuck with me, man. Well, I have kids, so I don't get to actually play a lot of my games. So I stick to a very small library of games. So I just need to play more. That's what I love about the Switch, actually. So I'm playing a lot more games that I've never played in genres and stuff. Figuring out.
Well, thanks to our video, you got to play Paw Patrol on a roll.
Heck yeah, man. I was playing that yesterday with my kids.
I mean, if there's any other game you'd like to play with your kids, I can make a video on it if that helps. Like,
please
if
do.
you want a reason to play Galgun with your kids, I can do that.
Yeah, that's gonna be a tough sell playing that in front of the wife. But yeah, man, Paw Patrol, it's awesome. I rescued some dude that broke his knee yesterday. It was great.
I recall that. What is no, I was wrong. What was your first adventure in collecting before the Switch?
First adventure in collecting.
Yeah, basically, what was the first thing that you dove super hard into, like you're doing the Switch now? What was the first thing that you did that with before the Switch?
I'd probably have to go with the shot glasses. It was really random, but everywhere I went, from high school on, I would collect a shot glass. I traveled all over the states. So I've been to most of the 50 states. So I probably have a shot glass from most of the 50 states, plus a lot of places overseas I've been. So. On
behalf of Indiana, I'm sorry.
Yeah, I'm sure I have an Indiana one in there, or Hoosiers or something. So. But yeah, I was pretty hard up on the shot glass collecting for a while. They're in a box here somewhere in my garage. But my wife didn't let me display them in the house.
It sounds like most things are in a box in your garage. I'm just saying.
Yeah, it's we live in a pretty small house, so
stop having kids. It gets smaller every time you have.
I know,
one.
right? I'm not sure I want to keep collecting the kids, but the wife does. So. But
and they don't even have to stay in the garage.
My game room now. It's going to be sweet. In 12 months when I finish it, it's going to be sweet. So. Someday.
Someday. So what game do you want to see get a physical release? And why is it Vroom in the Night Sky?
Well, I was just about to say that one, but I don't know. I really love Zelda, and there's a lot of ones that I haven't played that were on other systems, like A Link Between Worlds and stuff like that. So if they had some kind of compilation of old Zelda games, I think I would love that.
That's an acceptable answer.
Okay. All right.
We'll go with that.
I mean, Half-Life. Can I say Half-Life? I mean, that
you could say whatever you want as long as it doesn't already have a physical release. Yeah, of course.
I'd love it if they brought Half-Life, Orange Box, all that stuff to the Switch somehow. I don't
Seems
think
like
we'll ever get Half-Life 3, but
I think Soul was mentioning something about like Team Fortress 2.
yeah.
That'd be neat. But
I don't think I would play that on
Confirmed
the
or
Switch
just a
though.
wishful
No,
thinking?
no, just wishful. Like we were talking about it one day, but I don't think I'd actually play it on the Switch.
no, but you'd buy it and display it with pride.
Of course I would.
Okay, so let's see here.
This is the big one.
Uh-oh.
Yeah, yeah.
Should I hike up my pants?
Okay, yeah. Okay, name 3 collectors that you challenge to be guests in our next episode.
Ooh, 3 collectors.
So in other words, pick some other people that you want to see in the hot seat.
Answer questions like these or these exact questions. We don't know.
All right. I'm going to go with Pikmin Link. I think is probably how you pronounce it. I love his display and his collection, so I'd like to hear more from him.
Isn't he the one that got a hold of the display from a closing Toys R Us?
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, I was jealous of that.
Yeah, I really like his display. It's different.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to throw out Iron Madden, fellow New York guy. I'm from New York, so...
He's the guy who didn't make it through Troll and I after he promised he would. After he lost a bet with me.
Hey, well, that's good because if we bring him on, then you can hold him accountable.
Oh, I will tear into him for sure.
And I'd like to hear from Shiggy, if you could somehow get Shiggy on.
Shiggy. All right. So Pikmin Link, Iron Madden, and Shiggy, you've all been called out.
Womp
You heard it here.
Maybe if they
on the
listen to our
spot
show.
They're all never going to talk to me again.
Well, hopefully, at least one of them will be willing to step up and talk to us in a coming episode here. Before we wrap this segment up, I just kind of want to give you maybe an open floor if there's anything else that you wanted to talk about or ask us, or kind of say to anybody that might be listening.
I just want to say thanks for having me on. It's a fun time. I like always talking to you guys. Yeah, I mean, that's about it. I don't have much to say.
You'll invite us over when you finish your game room.
Oh yeah, for sure. Definitely. You guys come to DC area anytime, you're welcome. That's for anyone out there. So. Give me 12 months though.
Okay, I was gonna say I'll be in DC probably near October.
Okay. All right. All right.
It'd be
You
a
put me
work
on
in
the clock.
progress.
October.
Yeah.
There you go. Tell the wife I got to get it done by October. So.
I'll be in Vienna, Virginia, near Gallows Road, around there.
I work right near there. So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There you go.
Make it happen.
Well, I do want to thank you for coming on and sharing your collector profile with us. We hope you've had a good time with us, and we'll see if one of those other people you've called out has the cojones to come on.
All right. Sounds good. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
I just like to say as we close out here, it's good to be back. Next month is going to be a big one. It's the 2-year anniversary of the Switch
And the 1-year anniversary of On the Shelf. We're hoping it's going to be our most exciting podcast ever.
Be sure to hit that like and subscribe buttons below.
If you're a Switch collector who would like to make an appearance on the show, let us know in the comments.
Until next time, this is Cyrix.
And this is Soul. And I just realized that it said next time in both of those lines. Until next time, this is Cyrix, and then we'll see you next time. So
we'll see you. Go bye.
Until next time, we'll see you next time.